I'm Amanda. So whenever I think about giving my testimony, I'm 40 years old. So it takes me way back to whenever I was about 3. See, I'm going to start crying. And so whenever I was 3 years old, it was me and my mom and dad, and I had a little brother and me. And our house burnt, and we lost my little brother. So although we can talk about it now, it had been a tragedy that we secretly carried for many years. It wasn't something that we spoke of. Mom and Dad said, I asked one time, "Where's Bubby?" And they said, "He's in heaven with Jesus," and I never asked anymore. But whenever I was a little girl, even in my teenage years, I never asked about it because I knew it was a touchy subject for them and for me. But I would dream all the time that it was my fault. I would dream, and it was always the same dream, that I caused the fire and that he died, and that we were playing with matches, and that's how it happened. So that was a lie. Now that I know that Satan fed me to keep me bound, I don't know, to keep me in bondage for so long. So whenever I was young, I would always count things, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and I never understood it until later, and I'll get to that. But I was an only child after that, and my parents never had any more children. And I was also pretty sheltered. They took me everywhere with them, of course, as any parent would. So, but I also struggled with depression and all kinds of things as a child, even at a young age, just a lot of not understanding things. And I know it stemmed from that because as a child, you don't understand, but everything's different because we lost our house and all of our belongings, but that wasn't just the case. We also lost our whole identity. My parents were trying to be parents to the child that they had left and trying to mourn the child that they lost and trying to hold it together the best that they could for me, of course, and make everything as normal as they could. And I know that now. But whenever you don't identify those things in life, they're just kind of secret bondages, honestly, and the devil uses those, even as a small child, even as, because that's the perspective I can give because I was a child. So I was pretty young whenever I started drinking and doing drugs and stuff. It made me feel like I fit in, I guess, and it also gave me a sense of not necessarily happiness, but like a euphoria of not really even knowing what was going on kind of thing. So I always kept people at a distance my whole life. My parents, I had friends that I cared about and stuff, and family and stuff. But as far as like letting anybody really in, I didn't really, because I was always afraid that they would leave. So I struggled with addiction and stuff for several years. And I remember one time I was 21 or 22. So from like age 14 until then, I was an addict. And it wasn't like I was addicted to this or addicted to that. It was never, ever at any point for me, any certain thing. It was always just the euphoria of feeling, not feeling, actually. So to backtrack, whenever I was in school, I got made fun of a lot, actually, because kids can be mean. I rode the bus home one day, and there was these high school girls making fun of me because my brother died. And so that was the last time I ever rode the school bus. So why they chose to do that, I don't know. But it really, really bothered me. And whenever I was young, I was pretty suicidal. There were several times. I overdosed a couple times. And it wasn't because I didn't feel loved by my parents, because I always knew they loved me. It was just, again, the dream I always had, and I never knew because it wasn't talked about. So just the devil really put a lot of baggage on me whenever I was young that I didn't even know to identify. Now, we did go to church after that happened. We went to Blue Buck. I remember because my dad and I would always go to the altar and pray. I would have him take me up there, and we would pray every time. And one time we forgot, and I had him turn around and drive all the way back so we could go up there and pray. And then after a while, they didn't go, but I would still go to church. But then after I got a little older, that was kind of something that, just didn't do. But I knew God at a young age. So, and I believe that if that's instilled in there, it's always there now, So whenever I was, I don't know, 21 or 22, I can't remember. I remember one day I was so just like done with life. Everything just always seemed like it just was not worth it. And I loved my parents, but I was entering adulthood, and the doctors always told me I couldn't have kids. And so that would bother me. And I didn't ever let anybody in as like a companion necessarily. I just kept them at a distance. It was never somebody, I just couldn't. And I found out I was pregnant. The doctors were like, no, you can't have kids. You're not pregnant. It's your thyroid, blah, blah, blah. So the day that I took a pregnancy test and it was finally positive, because for a long time it was negative, and so they did an ultrasound, and that was June 6th or June 10th, and I had him July 12th. And so it was like I didn't know. I just thought I was sick, and then all of a sudden I was going to have this baby. But I remember in the driveway one time, I was crying and praying because I was depressed and lonely and just wanted something to love, if that makes sense. Something that I could control. And I prayed one day and I was like, God, if you would just give me a child, I feel like I would be okay. And he did. And I was okay for a little bit. But see, I was still trying to fill that void with something because I still didn't understand, that. And I had Nolan, and I remember I had him, and I would just stare at him all the time, just stare at him. And I would always ask my mom, is he breathing? Is he breathing? Like just like a new mom thing. But I didn't realize whenever I had him, I was completely terrified. What if something happens to him? What if something happens to him? What if something happens to him? And it was a constant. And it became really kind of too much for me, and I kind of checked out for a little while. I went back to using, and it was pretty bad then. And so, my parents kept Nolan a lot. I was afraid because I was attached to him. So I was afraid, what if he leaves too? So I tried to just disassociate myself. That sounds terrible as a mother, but that's just what I did. And that's how the devil tricked me into staying in that fear. And so he was not real old. It took me a little while to come around, and I made my mind up. I was like, I'm done with this, because I hated it. I hated living that. I hated everything that I did. I hated living that way. I hated being away from him. I hated not being the mom that I wanted to be. And I hated all of that. And I knew something inside me always told me, you're better than this. So I did get sober. I quit. And I got sober and started coming to church here. We all got saved whenever David came, and we all got saved that day, and we all cried and prayed. And so it just took me a little longer. But still, I didn't know the story of my brother. And I know a lot of people don't understand that if there's an unknown bondage, an unidentified bondage, you can't heal from it. And I never understood. It took me a long time to understand that. And so I was sober for a long time, and I worked and took care of Nolan. And I always lived with my parents, that I have them and they have me. And that's... And I still never really got attached to a man necessarily, in fear of what happens then, because then that's another piece of me away. I was always very in control of who I let in. I was very guarded. And so I had accepted the fact that Nolan had my heart, and he did definitely. But so he was, I think, 5. And I met my ex-husband. And the moment I met him, I knew immediately, and as crazy as it sounds, I loved him and I wanted to marry him. And we got married 11 days later, we ran off and got married. Nobody knew him. I really didn't even know him. But nevertheless, we did that, and which was really random for me because immediately I loved him, which was hard. That was different for me. I had never done that ever with a random person. You know what I mean? So we got married, and So then we decided we wanted to have a baby a couple months later. So we started trying, and we were married and everything. And it was a little while later we found out I was pregnant with Josiah. So that was exciting. I was super excited. And having him, he had yellow jaundice, so he had to go to the hospital. And that's just a minor thing, but for me it was huge. I remember being in the hospital parking lot in Houston freaking out. My mom saying, "Sis, he's going to be okay. This is a pretty mom. Like, it's not okay." I was just freaking out. So I was married, and we were happy at that time frame. And then, so I worked at the nursing home, and I had joined the fire department. And I was a first responder, and I worked a motorcycle accident, my first accident I ever worked. And it was a serious one too. And I loved it. Not loved that it happened, but I loved being there to help. And I liked that. So it prompted me to do EMT school. And I was pregnant with our second, Tressie, at that time. So, and Matt and I were not doing very good because he was unfaithful. So I was losing that part of me. But I was walking with God then. I came to church faithfully. I read my Bible faithfully. I helped downstairs with the kids. I was living for God, and I thought he was too. And I think there was times he was, but nevertheless. So whenever I had Tressie, I had to have the spinal fusion. And so I had just graduated EMT school. So I couldn't pursue the career and I wanted that badly, So I couldn't pursue that career. And in the same time frame, my ex-husband started cheating on me again. So I did file for divorce. And I was on, I had a complete spinal fusion. So I have 26 screws in my spine and 2 rods. And so I was on a lot of medication and very depressed. So I lost my husband, my career. I couldn't take care of my kids. I couldn't even turn myself over in bed. So, and I was young, so it was traumatizing. And I was on so much medication. I remember crying and telling my mom, "I feel like I'm losing my mind." And literally I was. And I did. So I had given myself to this family that I had. And it was God. And so I prayed and I asked God to bring my husband home, and he did. And he did, and everything was good for a little while. But what I didn't take into consideration then was that my ex-husband had his own free will, and God couldn't control that. In my mind, it was God's fault, though. And I was mad. I was so mad at God. I was mad at everybody here at church. I was so angry. And again, I had regressed to a child of hating everything. I couldn't, we had a really messy divorce. He took off with the kids and things. And so again, I checked out. But this time it was way worse than what it had ever been. The devil was setting me up for death. Absolutely was. And I was so angry with God. And I wanted to die so bad. Whenever people say there's a spirit that comes with suicide, I know that all too well. There definitely is. And if it wouldn't have been for God holding me, there's multiple times I would have died. I tried, I know. And so things went on, and it was a couple years. My parents had my kids. I hate that, but that's just what it was, because I didn't want to put them in my mess. I should have been there, but I wasn't, so it wasn't their fault. I just wanted to make sure they were okay and loved, And I didn't feel like I was good enough, if that makes sense. And so it was a couple years, and I ended up in a very bad situation, very dangerous situation, which will oftentimes happen whenever you choose that lifestyle. And but I would still keep in contact with my mom and dad. And I got to a point where I wasn't allowed or able. So I started praying because I knew that I knew I wouldn't live if something didn't happen. And I knew God. I knew him very well, but I was so mad at him. But I had started kind of coming back to myself, but I couldn't get out of the situation I was in. It wasn't as simple as just leaving. And so I started praying, like, God, I need to get arrested. Like, I need to go to jail. And that sounds crazy, but I knew that was my only out where I would be safe and my family would be safe. And it literally wasn't even 2 weeks and we got arrested. And my dad said that Shannon Caldwell had told him around that same time frame. Now, I hadn't been in contact with anybody down here. Shannon told him, have you heard from Amanda? And Dad said, no, we haven't. He said, well, I have a bad feeling. So if you don't hear from her before too long, we need to file our missing persons report because this person is very dangerous. And so, it wasn't just me. God was orchestrating people down here and we got arrested. And so, of course, that was not where I wanted to be at first. I was like, oh, man. But it was a sigh of relief, too. A lot of mixed emotions with going to jail. First of all, I went to Douglas County Jail, and it was like the worst jail probably in America. But I was there the first night, and there was these two other girls there, and I didn't know them. I'd never met them before in my life. And the one was there for drug trafficking, and she didn't really know anything about God or the Bible, but those two had begun reading the Bible together while they were in there, because they were both in there for some pretty serious charges. And a lot of times people will find God in jail, which is good. I knew God, but so I still also had this chip on my shoulder. Even though he rescued me and saved me, I was still... so this girl, I did not know her. She said, hey, will you come sit down beside me for a minute? And I did. And she told me all this stuff. She grabbed my hand and she's like, God loves you so much. And he saved your life. And he wants you to, and just all this stuff that only God could have orchestrated. Because she didn't know me. She didn't know that I was mad at God. She didn't know any of that stuff. And it was specifics about life. So I knew at that moment, I just cried. I was like, ah. But I knew at that moment that this is exactly what I needed. So I timed it on, and I told my mom I wanted out a couple different times. I'd be like, I really want to get bonded out or different things like that. But there came a point in there, I told my mom, I said, Mom, I'm going to be here for about a year. She's like, no, sis, you might not. And I said, no, I will be. God's told me this. Because I started praying, and I started reading my Bible. And I started, because her speaking that to me, I knew that was God. And so I started letting go of my anger. It wasn't God's fault. But I didn't understand that. But that girl spoke specifically about that situation to me. So it was softened that, And so I got sentenced to prison. And before I went, I told my mom, I said, I'm going to use every day that I'm gone to work on all these things that I've carried. All this hatred and all this anger and all these things, I'm going to work on them. And that's what I did. So whenever I got to prison, I prayed because I was scared. Even though I lived a rough life, it was a very secluded, rough life. I was the most exposed, unexposed person probably in the whole scene. And so I got there and I prayed. I was like, God, I'm so scared. I am so scared. I wanted to go back to that terrible county jail, honestly, because there was 1,700 women. I was just like, take me back. But I prayed. I said, God, my mom and dad got me a Bible. I said, God, I need a Bible verse to stand on while I'm in here. And it was John 4. I opened my Bible, and it was John 14:27. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you. And immediately I was like, that's it. And I was just peaceful. And the next day, the girl in my room, she said, hey, you read your Bible all the time. Do you happen to know any Bible verses about peace? I was like, actually, I do, yes. So I told her. And so I started my journey in there of healing myself and allowing God back in my life. And daily, that's all I did. I read my Bible. I read, anything that was Christian, motivational books. My goal was to read all Joyce Meyer's books, but I didn't get them all read. Most of them, though. But before I had my back surgery, Mike Hawkins prayed over me. And he said, little by little, God will fix your back. And the surgeons, they got all the... I had to backtrack a little bit. Sorry. Is that okay? Okay. The surgeons, they planned on getting half the curve out because it was at 85 degrees. And they got all the curve out. And they told my parents and I, they said it was the most unusual surgery we've ever done. And he said, little by little, we pulled and it came straight. Those words that Mike spoke. So, also another thing about that, whenever I was in prison, every book I read had the words little by little in it. Every book I read. So little by little, God was healing me. And I thought it was just my back. It wasn't. It was all these things. So I was in prison for a little while. And so in there, you can get a therapist or a counselor or whatever. And they're not always the best. But God orchestrated this for me. And for my kids and for my family, And so I walked in the room and the lady was like, nice to meet you, and I was only in there for a couple minutes and she said, I'm not supposed to do this. She said, but I have this box here on my desk and I would like you to pick one of those cards. They have a prayer and a Bible verse on it. And it did. And I did. And it talked about little by little, one step at a time. And it was either Hebrews 15:13 or 13:15. I can't remember exactly the verse. But she said, I want to know what happened to you when you were a child. Something traumatized you at a young age. And she also had lost her brother, and she was an only child. So I told her about that. And she said, that's it. That's what we're going to work on. And we did. And that one thing, the devil held me in bondage with for all these years, for all these other things, because when something would hurt me or something would feel like it was getting taken, I would completely shut down. And I didn't realize that. I was 36 years old. I was 3 when Bubby died. I had no idea until God used that one lady. And her and I worked through that. We talked about it, and she was so awesome. So in prison, I was there. I remember me telling you, I told my mom I'd be there about a year. Altogether, it was 363 days. And now they give you an out date. So my out date was like way far out, like way longer than what I knew I needed to do, because you only do a percent, and I had never really been in trouble. And so I kept, and I didn't want to stay that long. I just didn't want to stay that. It was a long time. It was in October was the out date, and you'll understand the length of time that in just a second. So I wrote the parole board and I wrote the IPO, because in there you can't really go talk to people. You just have to write them. And you don't have control really over anything. So I would call mom and dad and the kids every day. And sometimes I would be really down because I was getting better. And so getting better, I wanted to be who I knew I needed to be. So mom and dad would remind me, we're going to pray that outdate will change this. And it will. And I'd say, okay. So I'd write the IPO and they'd write me back, or they'd call me to their office and they'd say, Miss Wade, you need to stop writing this. Your out date is October and it's not going to change. There's nothing you can say that's going to make this change. And so I'd go back and call Dad and be like, oh, it's not going to change. And he said, sis, we're praying. And so one day I was in the house, they call it, and they called me. They told me to put my khakis on. And anytime they told you that it was something important, you had to go see the IPO or, somebody important. So my roommate said, I bet your out date changed, because she knew my family and I and my kids and I were standing on that changing. And so I got over there, and the IPO, she's handing me the paper. She said, here's your out date. And she said, and we have to work fast because it's in 8 days. So I got out July 3rd. So that was toward the end of June. And I just started crying. And she's like, I'm going to stop telling people stuff like this, because all they do is cry. And I told her, I said, my family and I have been praying and believing for this. And so she said, well, there's not a reason on why it changed. They didn't tell me or anything. It just changed. So I went back to the house and called mom and dad. And of course, they were both hip hooray and everything and very happy. And the kids said, Mommy, did your out date change because we prayed? And I said, absolutely. Well, about 3 weeks before that, I had gotten very discouraged, and I left the IPO office after they told me again it's not going to change. And I said, okay, God, this is the deal. Like, I want out of here and I want to go home, but I'm going to be here until I'm ready, because I want to be right when I get out. I want to be able to live right for you, for me, for you, for my children. And it was just a couple weeks and my out date changed. And so some of the women that were there, they would say, hey, are you the girl whose family was praying and believing that your out date would change, and then it changed? And I'd be like, yeah. And they would say, will you pray with me? Which is very odd, but they heard that, because that's unusual. It went from mid-October to the beginning of July. And it was just, I had 8 days to get ready to go home. So it was very just sudden, and it was absolutely because we prayed and believed. And so the kid's saying that. So I remember whenever I got out, I was so nervous. And Tressy's like, Mommy, you look different. She hasn't seen me for a while, though. But I was different. So I'd been out a couple months, and my dad and I were in the truck one day, and he just randomly, out of nowhere, told me the story about the day Bubby died. We had never spoke of that my whole life. He told me that whole story that day. And now, even though it still brings tears, and it always will, because I love it, he was my brother, and it's sad, of course, we can talk about it. And it's talked about at our house. And it's not a subject that Satan can keep us bound. So whenever he told me that day, I was like, that is just so odd that he would, but he felt, I don't know, it was God orchestrating for us to be able to maneuver to heal from that. So now it's been almost 5 years since I was arrested. And I work at a domestic violence shelter, and I'm a mom of 3 kids. I don't have it all figured out, but I feel like I'm sure doing a lot better than what I once was. And if there's anything I could convey to other people, is that there's always hope with God. And he is definitely real. And if you don't know that for sure, come sit with me for a minute and I can make you believe that. And he loves us. And we don't ever surprise him. And it's not something that we can get or get taken away. He just loves us just because. Even whenever I was so angry and I cursed him, he still just waited for me to call out to him. And he did save me. And I was a mess. He didn't have to save me. I didn't love him then. I was very angry. But he still saved me. So if I could convey that to anybody, it would be that God does love us.